Bienvenidos. My name is Gonzalo Casals. I'm the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for the City of New York. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this very important seminar. In particular, I want to thank you, the Mayor's Office for Media and Entertainment, who are co-presenting this with us, and Commissioner Del Castillo is here with me. I also want to thank the DCLA staff, Derek and Perianne, for putting this together. And of course, I want to thank a lot, not only the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, the Mayor's Office of Citywide Event Coordination and Management, the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, and the New York City Department of Transportation for bringing their expertise and their knowledge to us. In the staff that is going to present today, you're going to see great advocates of your work. We all want to help you bring joy, entertainment, inspiration, empowerment to our fellow New Yorkers through your work. And we want to make sure that we can do it together in collaboration. That said, our main priority remains safety. So even we're going to be talking about outdoors activities. Some of those are still restricted. And we want to make sure that we continue to recognize the sacrifices that many New Yorkers have done to help us stop the pandemic in the city. And we want to continue to be vigilant. After the program, we're going to be distributing some resources that are being presented today here, and a recording of this presentation is also going to be online. If you have any other ideas of how DCLA, Media and Entertainment, and any other agency at the city can help you continue to do your work through these times, please let us know so we can make those the information available. We are going to allow each of the agencies to present their permitting process, and we're going to, after each of those, we're going to allow for a Q&A. With that said, I want to pass it to our co-presenter, Del Castillo. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonzalo, and really pleased to be partnering with you and our fellow colleagues in city government to present this webinar, which I know has been a long time in the making and likely long anticipated as well. We, like you, recognize that this has been a very difficult time for our arts and culture and entertainment organizations who have been really constrained, if not completely shut down during this time. And we really have been trying to find ways to support. We've done a series of town halls and ongoing conversations. But I also want to thank our colleagues for joining this call. I think the representation on this call should hopefully signal to our participants, our viewers, the real commitment on the part of the city to find ways to coordinate and collaborate so that we can really support the organizations who are listening in today. I just want to give a brief overview of our agency. Some may be familiar with us, some may not be. And I'm timing myself. That's what I'm looking down because I want to make sure that I am mindful of everyone's time. So the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, most folks know us from our origins as the New York City Film Office, the Mayor's Office of Film, Theater, and Broadcasting, which permits on-location filming throughout the 5 boroughs. And we did that for the better part of 50 years when our office was then expanded to include oversight of the Municipal Radio and Television Network, NYC Media, which brings you the mayoral press briefings, city council hearings, and a host of other programming. And then about 4 years ago, our portfolio was expanded to include support for a lot of the city's creative sectors, film, television, theater, advertising, publishing, music, digital content, and then the nighttime economy. And I know that sometimes it's a little bit confusing where our line ends and Department of Cultural Affairs begins. And so I think it is important to sort of stress, to highlight the ways in which that we work together, and then what is distinct. I think primarily Department of Cultural Affairs, and Gonzalo, please feel free to jump in if I'm speaking out of turn, but has by and large largely been a grant-making organization, artists and cultural support. The space that we overlap is by trying to coordinate an agenda and supports and promotion, certainly, but we tend to focus more on the business, the corporate side, if you will, and the for-profit side, working with venues, working with studios, etc. And so, but I think especially throughout the pandemic, we've realized that we really do need to be working much more closely with Department of Cultural Affairs, and we've welcomed that partnership. So, you know, our film office, we primary four divisions at the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. The film office, which, as I said earlier, issues permits for on-location filming throughout the 5 boroughs. And then we have the Office of Nightlife, which is primarily responsible for supporting the nighttime economy. Really, ironically, in a city that never sleeps, we hadn't had a nightlife office prior to 3 years ago. And so that has been an office that's really been in the making over the course of the last 3 years. Obviously, the pandemic kind of switched the focus, or intensified the focus, if you will, to really make sure that our restaurants, bars, and venues are properly represented at the policy making table, really understanding what some of the critical issues are and trying to find ways to support that industry. And then, as I said, NYC Media, which is the broadcast operations, and then programs and initiatives. And what that means is we operate a number of workforce programs, industry development initiatives, career development initiatives, educational programs, as well as program partnerships with festivals, events, some nonprofit organizations, to really ensure that there is a talent pipeline and an environment where the industries that we serve really can thrive. Prior to the pandemic, our entire portfolio represented about 104 billion in economic activity for the city and close to 500,000 jobs. You know, in the time since, as I said, like we immediately got on the ground, doing surveys, town halls, making sure that our businesses and workers in the industries really understood what sort of resources were available to them. And then also just trying to get a sense of like what were some of the needs that they had if they could open, what would that look like? And I think that's informed some of the conversation that we're going to have today, at least in the space of film permitting, which that is our primary function in this outdoor permitting space. Film permit activity stopped on March 21st. On June 22nd, when phase 2 opened, we were allowed by the state to permit cast and crew of up to 10. In phase 3, that expanded to 25. And when I'm talking about the caps on cast and crew, that has to do with like exterior filming on public property. And then in phase 4, that even though the state said we could open it up pretty, with no cap, just given the limitations and the density issues and sort of understanding where the industry was at when we opened in July, we set a cap at 50. And that was trying to be mindful of the fact that we have outdoor dining, we have open streets, and we also knew that a lot of the major productions, like the film and television series, probably really weren't going to start coming back in full force until September. And so then as of September 1st, we've increased that cap to 100 cast and crew on public property. And we've started holding some parking again. That is the primary area of our permitting authority, is to hold parking for on-location filming. And then at indoor facilities, you can film it up to 50% capacity. So I think, and then we're looking at, as of October 31st, removing the cap and going back to sort of normal permitting activity. But I would say with that a caveat that, like, while it may be normal permitting activity, what it looks like is quite different, because there are very specific safety guidelines and protocols as to how you can film, requiring testing, PPE, social distancing, unless the job functions present a challenge for that, and there are specific guidelines for that. And there's a safety affirmation that you have to file before you even begin to land your camera on set. So I'm happy to take questions about that activity in particular, because I could go on, but I want to make sure that I'm responding to the specific questions of the participants today.
And as we wait for questions from the audience, one of the things that I've seen cultural organizations doing more and more that sort of falls in your film production sort of bucket is streaming, right? Either both indoors or outdoors, doing a performance of some kind of a program and without an audience, and then streaming that online. Can you talk a little bit about the logistics of going around to get a permit like that?
Absolutely. So, you know, it's true. You can't have a performance with an audience. If you're going to have a performance with an audience, it has to be a casted audience and limited to certain restrictions. And I'm remiss, I did not introduce my colleague Stephanie Argamaso, who is a senior production coordinator in the film office. Stephanie, you can feel free to weigh in if I'm like saying something completely wrong. But you can, as a performing arts organization, film a performance or stream a performance, and then your activity doesn't fall under performance guidelines anymore. It then falls under media production guidelines, right? And so the testing requirements, the limits on cast and crew sizes, the limits on audience capacity, all of those would apply in that scenario. I would be remiss if I didn't say that we actually have the specifics of our guidelines for production on our website, and it's nyc.gov/MOME. We have sort of the official legal directive that I've had to issue, but then we also have, helpfully, a plain language distillation of what it actually means, along with an FAQ. We also have a map of locations that are sort of restricted for filming because of open streets, open classrooms, outdoor dining, and also just we tend to have certain areas that, you know, we try to manage the ebb and flow of production there. And then additionally, what I think will be interesting to folks on this call is, you know, we recognize, like I said, if you're a performing arts organization, you're supposed to be closed. But if you're filming that performance with an audience, then you can do that with a casted audience. You can do that under the constraints of the media production. Similarly, there are different scenarios in which you can do music, right? And we worked really hard to try to distill the different types of scenarios in which you can do music, whether you're at a restaurant, whether you're filming it for a media performance, whether you're doing it as part of a low-risk outdoor activity or part of a low-risk indoor activity. And so we just went live with that guidance this week. And so you can also find that on our website as well.
And there's a specific question that we've been going back and forth with this for a while now. And just to make it clear, the question says, so theaters can use their space to film, filling them to 50% to capacity as long as all the present are cast and crew. And I think there's a confusion between the limitations of, you know, how big is your production crew and the capacity of the space.
Yes, it is indeed confusing. Stephanie, like I said, you can feel free to jump in. The way that we have explained it in our guidance is that it's 50% of occupancy, right? So it's not necessarily based on the number of seats, but it's based on the occupancy of that space, and that is how many cast and crew you can have in there. That is distinct from the limits on the audience that you can have there. The audience, and I don't remember what the restrictions are, but the audience does have to be casted. Can't just be general, and you can't sell tickets. But the audience limitations are treated as separate from the cast and crew limitations. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yep. And the audience limitations for a live audience is 25% of the seating capacity or 100, whichever is fewer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can the Office of Nightlife assist in promoting the One Brooklyn Jazz Festival? Dates are December 4th through December 13th. Who can I contact if so?
So I'm going to post my email, and then I will make sure to direct you to our Director of Special Projects, Amanda Nguyen, who has been actually very creative in thinking about how we can support these types of events with promotion and advertising. And so I will post my email address in the chat, and you can send it there, and we'll make sure that it gets to the right person. But it would be through our special projects team at the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment writ large, through our programs and initiatives team, not specifically the Office of Nightlife necessarily. And then if it turns out that there's a particular reason or intersection for that, we can discuss that offline.
So there's another again question about repeating clearly the indoor capacity for filming.
Okay, I'm going to let Stephanie do that if that's okay.
Sure.
Yep.
So the indoor capacity on private property for filming is 50% of the occupancy. So you would have to go to the building and find out what their capacity would be in that space. And then it would be 50% for your total cast and crew.
Great. I'm going through the questions here.
While you're doing that, Gonzalo, I would like to assure folks that if you do have questions about a production that you want to do, like call us for sure. We will respond to those. And then if you already know that you want to do a production, we really encourage you to have a production meeting with us as early as possible, and certainly not less than a week in advance, because we have to give, depending on the situation, we have to notify the communities at least 48 hours in advance of filming. So, you know, we want to have those conversations as early as possible.
I'm going to ask the audience to save the question, unless, you know, they don't know who to ask the question, to save the question for each agency at a time. I see a lot of questions for parks, and we're not there yet. Can you, Stephanie, can you remind us the website in which you post all the information and guidelines?
Yeah, I just posted on the chat that it's nyc.gov/MOME. And then if they'll see the tab for film permits when they get there.
There's a question about how are these guidelines being enforced? Are they inspections?
We have field representatives, and our NYPD TV unit are going around to sets and just making sure that they're adhering to the terms of their permit. If they are not, they risk not getting a permit the next time around. If they're being really egregious, they risk being shut down. But by and large, what we found is, you know, productions want to make this work. Nobody wants to get in, you know, nobody's trying to cut corners here. Everybody wants to ensure a safe return of production, because it is such an important industry in terms of economic activity for the city.
Great. I think that's most of the questions we have for around film permitting. I'm going to ask Anne and Stefan if you can stick around in case other questions pop up. Thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Thank you.
And we're moving along with, I love the title of your agency, the Mayor's Office of Citywide Event Coordination and Management. I said it all at once. Ellyn, Canfield, Executive Director, is going to be presenting and answer questions. Welcome, Ellyn. You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner Casals. We are in the running for longest agency acronym, and we're going to throw a few more at you. Thank you so much, everyone who's here. I really wish we could see you all, but you all, your organizations, your community partners are such a huge part of why we're here. So before I hop in and give you the overview, sort of the big picture overview of what our office does and what are the state and city regulations that we're looking at when it comes to events, I think as you just heard from Commissioner Castillo regarding film permits. Film permits are a really great way activities can happen right now. We'll move into now talking about specifically public spaces and what can happen in those. What I would say to you is, if I were on the other side of this and listening, I would be feeling overwhelmed. We're not expecting that the notes you take during this meeting will be your guide to doing everything in every public space. And I hope the biggest takeaway that you get is that there are a lot of people on our side who are truly here to help walk through those conversations. Like, every email all of these teams that you're going to hear from gets, and I can testify to this personally, will get some kind of response, some kind of next step. So my hope is that in this next hour, we can really give you directions to the path for your next step, give you some broad ideas of what kinds of things might be possible. 50,000 people dancing in Central Park, not possible. 50 people, maybe. So we'll, give you some ideas about, as you're ideating and having creative thoughts about how to keep your organizations alive, how to keep them visible, what might be possible, but also just giving you a lot of resources that can then help you with those next steps. So I'll go ahead and attempt to share our PowerPoint. Okay, is that good? Everyone can see me or see this?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll try to do a very quick, and I'm also keeping an eye on my timer. We are the Mayor's Office of Citywide Event Coordination and Management. In our office sits the Street Activity Permitting Office. So aren't we cute? This is the team, my team. We are comprised of 4 teams, and I'm just going to quickly cover it because I think it will help folks understand sort of the world of doing events in the city. So our big umbrella, CECM, is responsible for coordination of all major public events taking place throughout the 5 boroughs. So that's everything from Times Square in New York to, New Year's Eve in Times Square, to the marathon, to little tiny brand activations, street festivals, parades, you name it, where we touch in it some way, whether it's our direct permit or whether we're helping to coordinate the city permits. And I think, remember when we're saying permits, permits basically means like the check boxes that something is safe and can happen smoothly in the city. It's not like an arbitrary, yes, we like you, or no, we don't. The permit means that the fire trucks can get by and the police have awareness of what's going on, and the church and the school that are on that block know what's going on so that their services aren't impacted. It's like this whole range of basically using public space as a venue and doing the coordination. So we're the overall connector of the dots for any permit that touches public space, whether it's a PD sound permit, Department of Buildings, stage, etc. We're not going to get into the weeds on all that today. We'll try to give you the broad overview of things to think about when you're doing events in public space, but that's our big picture team. That's what our events team does. The street activity permitting team, I'm sure some of you have heard of SAPO, mythical land of street event permits. This is our team who actually processes, works individually with every applicant on their safety plan, their site plan, for events in the streets, again, ranging from really small brand activations to the really large multi-block festivals. You'll be hearing from the Department of Transportation. A way we like to think about it is the Department of Transportation owns and maintains streets, sidewalks, and plazas, and our team is the venue manager for those public spaces. So we're working with them to determine what are safe and appropriate uses, how city services are compensated, etc. You'll hear from them more on some unique programs, but we are your big umbrella permitting agency for streets. And then we also have on our team the CEMS team who builds and maintains the online application system. This is important because for many of you, this will be your next step to doing something in a public space. So we have a really robust online application. And this application also then allows us to interface and work within everything else that's happening in our streets. So my team right now, in addition to the normal event permits we would be doing, so just a quick snapshot, I thought this was interesting. I found it in an old presentation in 2018, the number of permits given out by all of the agencies you're about to hear from for special events or event type of activations. It's a lot, as you can see, well over 50,000 between our offices, parks, PD, the NYPD permits, parades, which I'll talk about in a minute, and all of our offices. Obviously this year that looks a lot different, but in addition to the sort of alternate types of events we're doing, we are currently overlaying and using the same system so that we can program open streets, open restaurants, right now outdoor learning for schools, medical sites. We're now permitting vaccine trial sites, which is, it feels like good news for everybody. So it's a lot that's happening in any given moment in our public spaces, and we are basically the gigantic whiteboard keeping track of it all. I was gonna put some more notes here, but I thought that this actually fit. So the big picture, what can we do in public spaces in New York right now? I'm gonna hit on a couple of things and then really quickly turn it over to Vicki and Stefan from my team. But the broad strokes are that for non-essential gatherings in New York City, we are limited to no more than 50 people at any one time. There are exemptions to that, including rallies, marches, demonstrations. Outdoor dining is not held to that. So there are things such as outdoor dining that are held to a capacity. And I know this is getting confusing, but I think it's important because you're going to hear us saying 50 people a lot. And there are, of course, we can all think of times we've seen more than 50 people gathered. But we are not able to give a city permit for an event or activity in a public space that is going to have more than 50 people concentrated at one time. We are working with and dedicated to being creative about that and separating people into groups. We worked with New York City Runs, and we're working with the Roadrunners on races where over the course of a day, we have 1,000 people run a race, but they're not in groups of more than 10 starting at any given moment. So though, again, not to go over every example, but there are a lot of creative ways we can do things, but we are currently not permitted by the state to do, for example, in a public space, a socially distanced theater performance for 200 people. That would not be something we're allowed to do. So do we think that's possible in the future? I do think so, yes. I think especially if we're looking at a spring, summer, and fall of 2021, where we're still working in similar constructions, like this is at the top of what we can make happen. But ultimately throughout the summer, we have been prioritizing those spaces for medical interventions, for open streets, and some of these other things. And my hope is, and my conversations with the governor's office indicate, that having some more flexibility for larger performances is a possibility, but I think it is really going to take the next couple of months of getting through schools reopening and some other things to see where we have that flexibility. The one exemption we have to that for the entertainment world is drive-in movies. Truly, right now, the clearance we have from the governor's office allows for movies, but not a drive-in concert. We'll keep working on that, but I hope that gives an idea of how these things are changing moment by moment as we see what can happen safely, the priorities that things need to happen in. I am gonna try to stop there before I take up all of our time. I wanted to quickly touch on, because we don't have NYPD on this call. The NYPD specifically permits parades. We're not issuing parade permits at all right now. And then demonstrations, rallies, and protests go through the NYPD. We'll touch on, those are for the most part being permitted as is. What is not happening right now is the NYPD will not issue a sound permit if there is also a stage. So we're basically saying you can have a sound permit for your small gathering. You cannot be trying to gather in people from all over the place with a sound permit. That's going to come up in some of these other discussions. Again, we're here to help you understand all of this. And I'm going to just quickly now turn it over to Vicki from my team, who's going to touch on, again, just the broad range of agencies that we're working to coordinate around these efforts.
Thank you, Ellyn. Hey, everybody, Vicki Amar. So there's a lot of information on this page, but I think the important things to note are it's 3 columns. The first column are the primary permitting agencies. Several of these agencies you've already heard about on this call today. The rest of them, like EDC, DCAS, Coast Guard, National Park Service, they also issue primary permits to go along with like a major event. And then the middle column are support permitting agencies. So say, for example, somebody had a SAPO permit as the primary event. They're doing a plaza in Times Square. They may be giving out food and beverage. So they have a DOHMH permit for health. They may be tapping a fire hydrant, so they need a DEP permit, or asking for a reduced fire lane, for example, so we have to get approval from FDNY. There's many different support permits that go along with the primary permitting agency's permit. And then we also have informational support agencies on the right. So for example, if we're doing something in Times Square, we may alert MTA and let them know that this may disrupt your service. It may, be close in proximity to one of your, areas. And basically, when we receive an application or an event proposal, we work with all of these city agencies to make sure that your event comes to life. Our office is sort of a little bit one-stop shop. We have, very good contacts at every one of these agencies, and we're happy to connect the dots, allow you to just, connect with them, make sure all the support permits or informational pieces are taken care of. We do our little checklist, and then you're good to go. So I think that's it for me on interagency coordination and all the different agencies in the city. Again, it's a lot to take in, but I'm sure we'll be able to share this information at a later point.
All right, over to Stefan. I know we're running a little tight on time, but we'll hit this quickly.
Take your time.
Next slide. So keep moving forward. So I'm Stefan Grybuaskas, Director of the Street Activity Permit Office. So we're in charge, as Ellen said, of permitting streets and sidewalks for stationary events. Here are some of our permit types. I'm just not gonna go through all these, but you can see the wide range of stuff that we do: health fairs, farmers markets on streets and sidewalks, block parties, everybody knows what those are, religious events, rallies and demonstrations on plazas, and then plaza events, which DOT, we work in coordination with them, along with street fairs, etc. Next one. So right now, I think Ellen covered a lot of this, but these are some of the restrictions that are applicable to SAPO permits right now. All events are limited to one block or one plaza block. Obviously, some plazas have multiple sections of them that are broken up by intersections, so that's what one plaza block means. But right now, every event needs to be limited to one block. So none of those multi-block street festivals are permitted at this time, or any multi-block concerts or any large-scale events. Additionally, as Ellen mentioned with the sound permits, we can't help permit an event where you're going to be seeking a sound permit from NYPD for a stage or a video screen, and they will not issue that sound permit either. Additionally, as everybody has probably seen and knows, DOT open streets and open restaurants are occupying a large space on the street right now, and in an effort to kind of preserve this space for open recreation and open restaurant usage, we are not permitting events that interfere with open streets or open restaurant locations. There are some exceptions to that, especially if it's a smaller event in a curb lane or just a sidewalk on the same street as open restaurants. We can consider it. Obviously, there are a lot of open restaurants spread throughout the city, so we can definitely work around these, but we're happy to work with you. And also DOT has that information available on their website where all those locations are to take into account for your planning. Also, the community board and precinct need to approve all applications. It's a little bit different than some of the other permitting agencies, but part of our process and the reason why we have a lot of our deadlines is to make sure the community board and precinct are on board with all permit applications and are approving of that event in that location and in that neighborhood. So part of your outreach in the application process, and we'll do this as well, we'll be reaching out to the community board and precinct and discussing your proposal with them in addition to applying with us. Additionally, under the executive order right now that we're under, every applicant's required to submit a COVID safety plan affirmation. I think I saw this mentioned in the Q&A, but basically this is the checklist that you're following all of the kind of health and safety guidance given by the CDC and the state to operate an event safely, including face masks, hygiene stations, keeping track of attendees if possible, and some of that stuff. And then you'll sign that and submit it to us that you're handling all of that stuff before we issue your permit. Next slide. So here's kind of some of our general procedures and fees and requirements. This is in normal years in addition to now. All applications, whether it's going to be a free permit or a permit we're going to charge for, still have to pay a $25 application fee when you submit the application. That's non-refundable. For most events, we require general liability insurance coverage for $1 million with the city and SAPO listed as certificate holders. So please be ready to have that. In some circumstances, we can discuss how to waive that, but that is generally across the board a requirement for all events. I think this is specifically relevant to this group, but fees will not be charged for events that we deem cultural or educational in nature and contain no or very limited corporate sponsorship i.e. music performances, art displays, games, dance productions, etc. However, the catch is these must all be free and open to the public. You can't fundraise at the actual event, and you can't sell tickets to that event if you want the fees to be waived. Revenue generated events will incur fees. A lot of those fees are on our website, and we're happy to discuss with individual people. Our email will be on the slide about what those fees are and how we can work around certain fees. But generally, for cultural institutions, the civic events, as we call them, are without limited corporate sponsorship and that are free and open to the public are really the route to go to get a free event in New York, minus that $25 application fee. Our website's right there, nyc.gov/CECM. And then I'm just going to give you a few examples. I'll briefly mention this because I know Parks is going to cover it, but I'm sure a lot of people saw in the news, New York Philharmonic pop-up bandwagon. All of the street and sidewalk segments on that were permitted by SAPO, and they kind of followed that model that I just discussed without fees. Everything was free and open to the public, under 50 people, etc. But I've also gotten proposals for other events like, performance in a glass window inside of a building with people, 50 people or less sitting outside of the building. Everything was free. Not limited advertising to reduce the amount of people that are going to show up. Obviously, the Philharmonic was good because there was pop-ups and they weren't announced until right before, so that was perfect for not drawing a over 50 person crowd. But we've gotten some creative ideas like that, the window jewel box theater type of ideas. We've gotten people wanting to do stuff on the sidewalk with a small audience around that. That's definitely the kind of things that we can work with you on. They could potentially be free. We could talk about insurance coverage, but we're getting a lot of creative ideas, and I'm sure we're going to get plenty more after this presentation, but there's definitely ways to work within not only not having fees, but also coming up with creative, safe ways to have events. There's one more slide or two more slides.
But before you move on, how do you, when you do these pop-up presentations, who's in charge of enforcing the 50 people limit? And
it's incumbent on the applicant to come up with a plan that they present to us that's going to show how they're going to keep the event limited to 50 people. Obviously, that enforcement is combined with our limited enforcement team on our team, along with the NYPD, complaints from the community, kind of the whole plethora of city agencies that get involved with social distancing issues. But generally, it's really incumbent on the applicant to show us how the event is going to stay limited. I think a lack of too much advertising is definitely a good way to keep events limited, but it's really it's incumbent on the producer to kind of run through that. And then here's just our general permit process. You apply online on our website. The agencies like the NYPD, as I mentioned, the precinct, the community board, they all recommend their opinion on the event. So approval or denial, that's why it's key to get them involved early and discuss what you think is going to work with them. And then we assess a fee if necessary, approve the event. And then for very large scale events, which we aren't really having a ton now, but even some of the more intricate, smaller events, Vicki's team will help get involved, coordinate more agencies if necessary, and also attend those events. I think that's the last one. Yep.
Okay, I just will quickly say, and we will be sending around, I know that the commissioner will send around a follow-up with our contact information, links, etc. So I know a lot of folks are asking about that. The Q&A right now illustrates just how complicated this is. We could sit here for 3 hours, and I know we'll hope to hit on a lot of this, but again, come to us. The Philharmonic came because they came, and you don't have to be the Philharmonic to do this. We permitted a free demonstration permit last week for Art Hero to do a demonstration where they sang songs from Rent as a press event in the middle of Times Square. We're working with a small nonprofit right now to do pop-up drag shows throughout the city. So the best advice I can give you is to come to us with your ideas for streets, sidewalks, and plazas, and we will try to find a way to make a version of it work.
And just, it keeps coming up on the Q&A box. The 50-person limit is regardless the size of the outdoor space in which the performance is happening, right?
It's really tricky. So because we aren't giving permits for anything that's more for SAPO, more than one block, yes. What the governor is deeming and gathering of 50 or not is tricky to figure out. However, we do know that specifically something like a large performance, even with like 50 people on the stage, 15 people in different groups right now, that would be a no. Because the physical space that we're permitting is relatively small right now, yes. And this again is for public space. So some of you are bringing up private locations. Again, they are required to abide by that 50-person limit, but things are going to be a little bit different in a private outdoor space.
Yeah, actually, Ellyn, can I just jump in real quick because I see that there is a lot of confusion, and I think one of the things that folks may not realize is the state has issued guidance for performing arts organizations and what they can and can't do just on the basis of like who they are, right? As whether they're a live music place or a bar or a dance workshop or whatever. And so I think if you haven't yet, I would start by going to the state website, and the way that they determine what guidance initially applies is based on your NAICS code, NAICS code. And so you will see where you fall under that, because I see that there's questions from like, you know, unfortunately, like dance workshops, like I don't know because I don't do dance, but they will have very specific guidance about what you can and can't do. Once you start wanting to do public spaces or film production, that's where we come in. But as a threshold question, I think you do need to check the New York Forward site for that.
And Ellyn, we're using the word performance very loosely, right? You know, we're talking about any activity, art making, you know, family program, you name it, right? It's all that under your, if it's on a street, on a plaza, on a sidewalk, it's all under your purview, right?
That's right.
What about the use of open streets?
Stefan, you take that.
Right now, we are not permitting over open streets. We're in exploration about potentially starting to activate those. That is not final or public yet, but we are looking at that. But currently we're not permitting open streets. I think there are kind of unofficial gatherings and activities that are going on open streets, but as of right now, we're not issuing permits on top of open streets. That may change. But there are still plenty of non-open streets that we can help you permit as well.
Great. For those that they used to organize parades and they want to adjust to do something that is a little bit more socially distanced, we still were not allowing any parades in the city so far. Is that correct?
That's correct. So anything multi-block is not happening, but I can tell you we're working with all of the parade organizations on some great, exciting alternate events, and those opportunities would be available to anyone.
Are there any requirements for who can apply for a SAPO permit? Specifically, can mutual aid groups apply, and do they need to have some kind of a specific status, such as nonprofit status, or an individual can apply for that?
I can take this. So for the civic event, which I talked about, which is the free permit for cultural events, we do require a 501c3, and we also require insurance. We usually also require that the organization's mission matches the activity that's going on. So say it's a theater group wants to do a theater performance, if it's a literacy group wants to do a book giveaway. So we prefer if the organization's mission matches what the activity is they want to do a free activity for, so that way it's not just a promotional event for that organization.
What about passing the hat and collecting tips?
So fundraising on city streets is not permitted unless you get a permit from HRA, or I believe it's HRA, which allows you to collect money on the street. I know that some of that takes place without us knowing, but we cannot knowingly permit fundraising on the street. We also have charitable permits, so some of our fees can be reduced for charities looking to do kind of fundraisers. I think in normal times we do a lot of galas on the street. But those are charged a different rate. They're not free. They're charged a fundraising rate because you are using the street to make money. Revenue generation will incur fees. Collecting tips on the street will require you to get an additional permit, and we will not give you a free permit if there is fundraising going on the street.
Fantastic. It's time to move on to our next agency. Thank you so much, Ellyn and team. Now the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, Sam Biderman, Assistant Commissioner, and team are going to do a presentation and then answer questions. Take it away, Sam.
Thank you, Hello and hello everybody. We are the Parks Department. I am Sam Biederman, Assistant Commissioner for Community Outreach and Partnership Development. You all probably know the Parks Department from our work in the field of trees and parks, but I think you're also pretty familiar with us as event partners. And we work with scores or hundreds of different types of organizations on different types of events across the city. Now, almost all events in the Parks Department live in the division that I lead, the Division of Community Outreach and Partnership Development. So that division is comprised of a number of different departments, but writ large, we're sort of the external affairs arm of the agency. And so we work with a wide variety of individual and institutional partners, ranging from the Public Theater, who we partner with on Shakespeare in the Park and Mobile Shakespeare. I think they may be on this call. The Philharmonic, all the way down to very small groups who are looking to hold like volunteer events or even birthday parties. So we work with a vast variety of groups. So within my department, or within my division, is the Department of Citywide Special Events. And I want to hand it off to that department right now. I think Venus is next up on this presentation.
I am. Thank you so much, Sam. So I'm going to be going over the special events permit process and a little bit more about what our office does. So again, to touch upon what Sam already said, the Citywide Special Events Office oversees permitting for large-scale events in New York City parks throughout the 5 boroughs. We also assist in the development of and the compliance with policies pertaining to event permitting standards. And this is something that we are doing more and more frequently nowadays because we are dealing with so many new challenges. And like Ellyn and so many others have said, are working to be flexible and creative with what we're permitting in our public spaces. So just an overview of our permitting process. Any type of event, really, and the variety is, the range is wide. It's a wide range of events that are coming to us and wanting to use our public parks need to submit a permit application. So on the screen, you can see the e-apply portal is found on this website. Anything that is over 20 people or more, whether that's a small birthday party or musical performance, does need a special event permit. There is a permit processing fee of $25, and just so that you're aware, we also require a minimum of 21 days to process an application. New this year is the requirement for a safety plan affirmation, confirming that you will institute measures to reduce the risk of COVID-19 at your event. And the applicant can also expect to work with a special event staff person to work out the details and logistics of that event. So we understand that people have a lot of questions, they're overwhelmed by this process, so you can rest assured that there will be a staff person that's going to help you throughout this process and walk you through some of the new expectations of our permit process. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of the world of special events on our side, the way that we're structured is by borough. So every single borough has a special event permit office, and on our website you can find contacts to all those permit offices, the office numbers, and some email addresses where you can reach out to them and ask questions. If you have initial questions about whether or not your type of event would be approved or eligible under the new parameters, you can feel free to reach out to them, and they're more than happy to walk you through what those limitations are. Then there is our office, Citywide Special Events Office, which Anthony, Sam, and I represent. And we really, like I said before, we deal with large-scale events. Over 500 people or promotional and commercial in nature. And so if a borough does an initial review of an application, again, they're mostly dealing with smaller events, birthday parties, picnic, barbecues, small gatherings, whether that be school-related or personal. If an application meets certain criteria, whether it's over 500 people or promotional and commercial in nature, they may get our office involved. And from that point, our office walks an applicant through a more complex process, which involves contracting, insurance. We do have a concession fee schedule. Again, this is triggered by events being over 500 people or commercial and promotional in nature. And so fees may be applicable depending on your scale of event. And so we walk them through that process. And usually these events are a little bit more complex. And so that's the role we facilitate in that nature. And so now I'm going to go over some of the new parameters, which we've touched upon a little bit on this webinar. But more specifically, these are parameters and some standards that we've set for parks permits. So again, these come from state and city guidance. These come off of this mayor's executive order. So again, attendance may not exceed more than 50 people at a time. I think we've heard that a number of times here today. Events may not prohibit members of the public from reasonable simultaneous use of all or part of a park for recreational use. Vehicles may not be permitted to enter the park to facilitate the event. So again, if you need to bring in tents and chairs and tables, this needs to be done by hand, carried in. Vehicles wouldn't be permitted into the park to facilitate your event and your event setup. And then again, amplified sound would be prohibited in conjunction with the use of a stage or a video screen. So to go back to what Ellyn said, we are entertaining amplified sound, just not from a screen or a stage. If you're having a small gathering and you have a small speaker system and your event needs audio, whether it's for speaker program or for music, we will allow that. And so now I'm going to pass it on to Anthony to talk through some of these parameters and how they're playing out in real life in parks.
Thanks, Venus. And just to put a finer point on some of the things Venus touched on, while the Citywide office under normal circumstances would be involved in events of a certain magnitude or size, these days we're playing a much larger role in policy creation and compliance and working very closely with Ellyn and all the other city agencies represented not only here but throughout the city to ensure that we're checking all the boxes, keeping everybody as safe as possible, while also ensuring that parks are being utilized by the public to social distance properly and to keep themselves safe and provide them a venue to recreate safely as well. You know, a phrase I've heard a lot during this period is New York for New Yorkers. And that's something that Parks has really taken to heart in terms of ensuring that we're doing everything we can, not only to make sure our sites are still venues for programming and creative thought, but also ensuring that they remain safe space for so many people without outdoor space to find a respite from what's happening in the world. So, you know, making sure that according to the EO, as Venus alluded to, our patrons are still able to recreate in our spaces while there may be these events going on. So that brings me to this slide in terms of which sites may be most likely not to be permissible for events. I think this may be a shorter list than the list of sites that is permissible. Again, we're trying to be as creative as possible in terms of what we can do and where we can do it. But with the limitations, you know, from the state and the city, I would urge people to consider, you know, larger spaces that can coexist with passive and public use. So smaller parks that may have high foot traffic or other recurring programming already located at them, I would try to stay away from. An example of one such park might be Union Square. Union Square in Manhattan, which is a central commuting hub, also hosts to a green market, which is an essential service right now, is a hard space to find time to carve out for event use when there are so many people moving through the space who need to be able to do so at a socially distant, in a socially distant way. Our amphitheaters and band shells, I put those on here because obviously there's amplified sound prohibition when you're using a stage. Many of these sites obviously have stages built in. That's not to say they couldn't be creatively activated in some other regard, but amplified sound would not be permissible there. And also, you know, we would need to make sure that the proper mitigation efforts are being put into place to ensure no more than 50 people are in the location at any one time. And as it pertains to parks, I do want to specify that that 50-person number does include not only people gathered there for the event, but also staff or other crew pertaining to being there to facilitate the event. Heavily used passive lawns. Again, this relates to our need to keep as much space open for passive recreation. So if there's a park in your neighborhood that has a lawn you see a lot of people on all the time, just sunbathing or recreating on, it's likely that we would not want to put an event there because it's such an important amenity to that community. Our athletic facilities right now, we're trying to bring back some athletic facility permitting. And so we are trying to stay away from putting special events or other programming in those facilities to ensure that they can remain available for our athletic facility, our athletic programs that you will typically see in high volume in our spaces. And playgrounds. Maybe this is an obvious one, but we do want to make sure our playgrounds are available to the children of our communities, and we would typically not put programming, even children, even family and children programming, we would not want to put in a playground unless that playground were potentially large enough or had a facility associated with it, like an MPPA or other large space that could be programmed while the public could still use play equipment and other features of that playground. So, you know, while this list is a good guidance, you'll always find potential nuances to our sites. Parks is not necessarily, in terms of creating policy, one size fits all the time. So we do try to be, you know, as flexible and creative as possible when working with our applicants to ensure programming can occur. And so, you know, what a lot of people on this have already said, and what I will repeat, is that if you have any kind of proposal that you're not sure about, or even if you are sure and you just want to get verification, please reach out to either the local borough special event office or to the citywide office, and we will be more than happy to review the policies and take a look at proposals for potential activation. And then just going into a little more detail on an example that Stefan touched upon earlier, the New York Philharmonic bandwagon that occurred throughout the city. While a number of them did occur on streets and sidewalks, there were a number of them that occurred very close adjacent to parkland. And so Parks worked with the Philharmonic to permit those as well. The setup of the event was a Philharmonic branded Ford truck. Performances, as Stefan alluded to, were unannounced and short. Pop-up style, you know, definitely prevents overcrowding, people from gathering beforehand, but also from staying for an extended period of time and seeing any kind of crowd building. And we also provided an opportunity for Parks, quite frankly, to work with the Philharmonic to help curate locations that were in need of programming that we felt would be good locations to provide an amenity like this too. Obviously, we always want to make sure whatever we're doing right now is of course good and important to the entity who's producing their event, but you know, many of our partners are just they're great to us and they want to work with us in any way possible. So we're always happy to work with them on assisting in finding synergies and ways to program at certain locations that we feel will be important for our communities and our constituents. Obviously, you know, we are trying to be creative in other ways. I don't have a slide for it, but there are other things we are doing. You know, Commissioner Castillo talked about virtual programming through a film permit, but certainly Parks had seen a part of that as well, and continue to work with people to capture content for either streaming or you know, to be broadcasted at a later date, and we continue to do that. There are potential opportunities to host you know, spoken word type of activations. Venus just recently worked on, or is working on, a proposal to do some readings from I believe it's a memoir that's coming out. And so those types of things are possible, and we're happy to work with people to try to mold and sculpt these proposals in a way that meets all the parameters for a parks permit, but also to ensure everybody's health and safety during these times. And certainly our special event coordinators can also assist in cutting through some of that red tape and providing additional, consulting on that interagency coordination that Ellyn and Vicki alluded to earlier, and pointing you in the right direction if parks is not the venue for you, to figure out the best ways that the city can make your programming happen.
Anthony, we have a lot of questions about conservancies and community gardens. How do you go about when you're working with those entities?
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, that might be a good question for you to answer.
Let me start with community gardens. So community gardens is also one of the departments that lives in our division. For the community gardens, we're working under slightly more stringent restrictions than other park spaces for the first part of the pandemic. So really starting in March, they were closed to everybody but the volunteers who tended to them. I believe 2 months ago, we opened them up at the gardener's discretion, so to the public. So certain gardens, depending on what the garden volunteer groups decided, could open to the public at given times. Now, just for some background, normally these gardens are held to standard operating hours that they must be open to the public. We're about ready to, now this is not totally public yet, but we are about ready to open up these gardens to events at the volunteer garden group's discretion. And just want to remind everybody that these groups are completely run by volunteers. So we give garden groups discretion as to how these events are going to be held and whether or not they want to be open to them. We are just finalizing event guidelines. We are about to distribute to our network of, I think it's 600 something gardens. We are about to distribute them this week or next. So events and gardens are coming, but the guidelines are not yet finalized. With conservancies, it does depend on the conservancy, how the event, how's the event. Good idea to start with Anthony's office if you are looking to hold an event in a conservancy. Anthony, am I wrong here?
No, that's absolutely right. And, we work very close with all of our conservancies, whether it be Central Park Conservancy, the larger ones like the Prospect Park Alliance, Friends of the High Line, all the way down to, friends of groups who are very involved in the programming and operations of their local parks. We try to make sure that when an event is being proposed for a certain site, if there's a conservancy group associated with that site, we will always make sure that they're aware and we align on the details pertaining to those events. Certainly there are times when they may come to us because somebody reached out to them, but it's always a good idea to start with parks first. There are some conservancies that have more flexibility in their spaces than others, and there are some venues in the city that a lot of people think are parkland, and we work very closely with other entities. But for example, the Hudson River Park Trust, which is actually state-run venue, and the Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy, or Brooklyn Bridge Park Trust, which is a privately run venue through that organization. But we have very close relationships with both of those entities. And so we do a lot of synergizing and sharing of information, sharing of policy. And we always try to operate as consistently as we can to ensure that, we are maintaining equity throughout these times and ensuring that everybody has equal opportunity to use our city spaces.
Anthony, I have some specific questions. What about those parks that already had a built-in stage? Can those stages be used with amplified sound?
So unfortunately they cannot, and I referenced that in my earlier slide about what venues people should not really focus on right now. Amphitheaters and band shells that are pre-existing, unfortunately do fall under the restriction of amplified sound in conjunction with a stage. So unfortunately we are not programming those spaces right now. Obviously we are open to creative ideas related to programming those spaces, but those spaces also present some difficulty with maintaining capacity limits at the 50-person number that is set. So as Stefan said earlier, it's kind of incumbent on the promoters, producers, applicants to ensure they're putting together a plan to get us comfortable with, ensuring a 50-person limit will be maintained. And we are open to looking at those proposals. But in addition to the amplified sound limitation, a lot of those venues do also have some challenges in terms of ensuring that cap is held.
I have a question about galas and fundraising events in parks. Is that something that you're permitting these days?
Yes and no. There are, again, mainly we would only really permit those types of activities on parkland, even under normal circumstances, for our partners and conservancy groups. We don't really permit private fundraising events generally on parkland, or frankly, private events, invitation-only events at all. Again, unless it's affiliated with a partner group who's fundraising for that park specifically. We have relatively stringent parameters under normal circumstances with regard to private use of public land as it pertains to parks.
How far in advance do you recommend a cultural organization approach you as they're planning to do something in a park?
As soon as they have the idea. We are happy to get in on the ground floor in terms of ideating and developing these ideas. Technically 21 days is the required timeline to submit an application, have it reviewed, and get it approved and processed. Our system, our e-apply system, will actually block you from applying if you're less than 21 days out. So we really do try to maintain that 3-week timeline for approval. That said, we urge people to apply as early in advance as possible. Looking ahead to 2021, our portal is scheduled to open on time the first Monday of November. That is when we start accepting applications for the coming year. It's always the first Monday of the year prior. So certainly they should feel free to apply as early as possible. If they're looking at 2021, as early as that first Monday in November, they can apply, and somebody will be in touch with them within a month or two, depending on the timing of their event.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Anthony and Venus. We're going to move to the next agency, our friends at the Department of Transportation. And I'm going to pass it to Wendy Foyer, the Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Urban Design, Art, and Wayfinding. I want to acknowledge that Emily Colasaco is the Director of Art and Event Programming, and she works with Nina Marin and Marissa Lazar. I say their names because DOT, and if I could see you all, I'd sort of have a show of hands, but I can't do that, unfortunately. But I'd say to acknowledge that DOT works above ground, not below ground. We are responsible for about 26.6%, but who's counting that 6%, of the land mass, and it's all above ground: bridges, tunnels, sidewalks, plazas, etc. We're about a 5,000 person agency, and 3 people run DOT Art and Event Programming, with a lot of help from our colleagues, both externally and internally. What I'm going to try to do is talk quickly about what we do now, what we have done, what's on hold, and hopefully what we're planning to do. We have 3 areas, as you can see, of work that we do: temporary art, permanent art collection, and event programming. The temporary art program is about 12 years old. Interestingly enough, there are many sort of somewhat unlikely canvases for art in New York City that you might not have think of, but very, very public. They are on bridges, on fences, Jersey barriers, step streets, and plazas. We've done about over 300 installations over the last 12 years. We work with nonprofit organizations, and the goal is to work with community organizations and create community partnerships and really support the artistic and creative community. I want to say that our programs are both proactive and reactive, okay? So proactive is we initiate certain things. Reactive is when people come to us and we have program tracks. The last slide you'll see, and I want you to hold on that when we get there, are ways to contact us because I can't go through all the details as we've talked about. The permanent art collection, we work very closely with the Department of Cultural Affairs to commission art for our capital projects. Event programming is both Car-Free Earth Day and Summer Streets. These are sort of one-off events. Unfortunately, they did not happen this year. Hopefully, they will happen in 2021. Summer Streets happens over 3 Saturdays in August, and Car-Free Earth Day happens in conjunction with Earth Day in April each year. Again, this is something that has expanded and grown over the last, I think, 6 or 7 years. We opened the streets 7 miles for Summer Streets. Car-Free Earth Day is from 42nd Street to 14th Street and Union Square on Broadway. But they focus around the environment mostly for Car-Free Earth Day. And then for Summer Streets, each year there's a theme that the Dot Art unit develops that then encompasses wellness, health, activities, but also cultural activities. And cultural activities become a very important part of our Summer Streets events. We have over 100,000 each Saturday. It's really, really quite wonderful. For that, we do an open call for proposals in 3 categories: activities, public art, and performance. They are reviewed by the Dot Art Advisory Committee, and all our projects in the temporary art program, we have an external and advisory committee, and they review all of our applications, and then we select them for the event that occurs for one or several of the days of the Summer Streets programming. As you can see here, we had a wonderful band, an all-women's band, drum cassette, and then a Latinx dancing program. We've had so many different types of activities for Summer Streets that happen each year. Again, it was suspended for this year, and we will begin to request proposals. Hopefully next year we will be able to begin that again. I'm not going to say hopefully. We will begin another Summer Streets and Car-Free Earth Day next year. I am very positive and optimistic about it. Now, our third slide goes to, I want to go back for a second though, just to make a distinction between what I'm going to be talking about on our third slide and this. For Summer Streets, we do get sponsorship. There's no fundraising on the event route, but we get sponsors for it. Because of that, we can pay for the performances. Funding is sometimes offered. We provide all the equipment and all the staffing for this event, these one-off events. Again, this is one of the proactive events. We request proposals, we review proposals. Again, in the temporary art program, we both request proposals for some of our program tracks, and then we respond to proposals. That's a very, very important distinction that I'm trying to make. All of this is in the new programming chapter of the Street Design Manual that's online, that you'll see. It's nycstreetdesign.info. So what we're thinking about is something will be called the Seasonal Showcase Series. And this came out of our discussions with Commissioner Castillo and our colleagues in the public space unit. We realize that there's a real need for exterior performance space. And we, as I said, have about 26.6% of the landmass. People have already asked about public streets and open streets, but we have plazas, we have wide sidewalks, we have bridges, we have step streets. So the idea will be, and we will go over this with our colleagues, to request proposals, but this is for a series of events that could happen on DOT managed areas. We work closely with our colleagues at SAPO and CECM about these things, but we want proposals for specific programming ideas that can happen over in a longer period of time. A number of these events could happen in the same place, or it can happen in multiple places, almost like people have been talking about the Philharmonic. So this is something that Emily and her staff are developing right now. We hope to have a request for proposals out in December of this year so that we can start programming some of these things in 2021. We're very optimistic that we'll be able to do this. And so we welcome some really creative ideas from the people who are listening and hearing this. I'm going to hand it over now to Andrew Ronan. Please hold on this for a second so people can write it down. And I'm going to hand it over. That's the programming chapter. And a lot of what Ellyn talked about and her staff is in that chapter in the street design manual. So it really lays out all of the different opportunities that can happen on the street. Thank you. Andrew?
Great. Thank you very much, Wendy. I'll just leave Wendy's last little slide there up. Each of our little segments here, which we'll go through swiftly in interest of time, end with a contact slide. So feel free to write down. And I believe we said that this information will be circulated following this webinar. So it'll all be contained in there. And I think one of the key things to any of this when it comes to our public spaces or our programs that program our streets is the earlier you can start communicating with us, the better. You know, the guidelines, as we all know, are very fluid and there's a lot of creativity in this room too. So the more we can be communication and talk with you about ideas for events in our spaces, the better. And then as we always do, we work hand in glove with our friends at SAPO to bring you, to bring our public spaces to you to program. I want to be very clear that all the guidelines that dictate what happened in our public spaces are set forth by SAPO and CECM, as Ellyn mentioned earlier. So everything that they've said applies to any DOT property where you're looking to program your event. That said, my name is Andrew Ronan. I'm the Assistant Director for Community Partnerships in the Public Space Unit at the New York City Department of Transportation. I think my colleague Kyle Gorman and partner in crime is out there somewhere in the audience. Together, along with a few other really dedicated people, we oversee New York City's public plazas, our open streets program, our weekend walks program, and several other programs that seek to sort of help New Yorkers reimagine the way they interact with and perceive their public spaces. Today we're going to talk mostly specifically about plazas as options for venues for a lot of the programming you might be looking to do. There's 82 plazas overall throughout the entire city of New York, with 64 of them currently open to the public. The rest are in some phase of design, development, or construction. And we call out here, if you can see the dots on the screen, there's green, yellow, and red. We've divided up our plazas sort of based on need. And green plazas are plazas that are taken care of by a well-funded business improvement district or other community partner organization, and tend to manage themselves and not need assistance. Whereas our medium and high need plazas are managed by smaller partner organizations, or in some cases, there are no partner organizations. And so we seek to allocate as many resources as we can to those locations so that they can deliver high quality public space to areas of the city. So there's not a distinction between Midtown Manhattan and Brownsville, Brooklyn in terms of quality of spaces that you're getting. For us, programmatically, and what I'm really excited about this conversation is we see programming and encouraging positive use of our spaces as a very important key to delivering that high quality public space year round. And like I said, it enhances the use of public space in a positive way, it enhances maintenance, and it just makes these spaces really part of the social fabric of the city. So we're really excited to encourage and work with you on bringing your very special work into these spaces, and with a particular emphasis on those red and yellow spaces that are sort of outside the central business district. But everything we've said today, everything I'm going to say today applies to all the plazas throughout the city of New York. So whatever lines up with you programmatically certainly makes a lot of sense. Whatever lines up with us programmatically is something I want to highly encourage. Just a quick example of a few types of plazas that exist. They are all different shapes and sizes. They take on the character of the neighborhoods that they represent. This is Avenue C Plaza in Kensington, Brooklyn. We've had a very long relationship there with Art Built Mobile Studio that brings that little container, for lack of a better term, to Avenue C every summer, and all sorts of exciting programming and workshops and things. This is a kite workshop that they held, comes out of that. And it's really helped to make this space really alive and welcoming, and really given the community around it an opportunity to participate and to program themselves. Corona Plaza in Corona, Queens, recently capitally completed. We enjoy a great relationship there with the Queens Museum that programs their Corona Day events every year, every summer. Unfortunately, we didn't get to do that with them this year, but they've kind of taken on the role of programming partner for the space. But it's very much open to other groups and organizations that want to program. And then Fordham Plaza up in the Bronx is one of our largest plazas in our highest need areas. It offers an amazing amount of space in a very bustling neighborhood, right over the Metro North Railroad tracks, right along Fordham Road, across from Fordham University, and with the amenities you see here. So that's just an example of 3 of the 64 that are available. We can certainly talk with you individually about other locations if you're looking for a space, or if you want to identify a space and come to us and talk about a space you're interested in working in. You know, some of the benefits of working in a public space in a New York City public plaza is you're not going to have to facilitate a street closure, right? Where you were with a street closure permit, you're going to have to be dealing with putting up barricades and traffic diversions and all like that. Plaza's already closed to traffic, so you don't have that hurdle there. You know, our plazas exist in the public right of way. They are meant to be in places where there are a lot of people, as a way to ease pedestrian movement and create open space. So that also translates to exposure. People are getting off those buses at Fordham Plaza and they're walking through and they're seeing your event and they're seeing what you're doing. It varies plaza to plaza, and in some cases, there's availability of existing plaza furniture, electricity in some locations, not all, access to water in some locations, not all, and other amenities that can help support an event and kind of reduce the burden on you needing to bring things or find a generator or set up your own tables and chairs. I'll get to how we coordinate all that in a minute. Well, and a lot of that is coordinated through our local plaza organizations. Every plaza in the city has, or is supposed to have, a community-based organization as its manager. And so what they do is they bring the local flavor and feel and knowledge to the context, and they also bring maintenance and other support options that can really help support events, but also just give you a sense of the local community and connection to it. And then plazas generally find themselves in commercial districts, so there's an opportunity there for a connection to local businesses, sometimes as ways to solicit supports for things like green rooms or bathroom access or the stuff that you're going to need, but also to tie in for promotional reasons, to benefit each other, right? Some considerations when it comes to programming in plazas is, of course, the weather and environmental conditions. These are outdoor venues, as we're talking about, and that's going to impact what you do and how you do it. Passersby, noise, you know, it's rather amazing in some locations where we have a 7 train rolling overhead. At Diversity Plaza, for example, you'd be surprised actually what you can get away with a small, simple amplification system, and how the noise of the 7 train filters off into the distance. Whereas at Myrtle Wyckoff Plaza, it's a different consideration, but it's still a consideration overall. Talked a lot today about the need for social distancing and other considerations. On the upper left-hand side here of the photos, you'll hear more from Street Lab in a minute, is sort of a unique setup that takes social distancing into consideration when it comes to things like solo performances and evenly spaced seating and such like that. So that's something we're very much willing to work with you on when it comes to site plans and figuring out the best location and how to successfully distance your events. So definitely, again, back to that communication piece with us. Other considerations, and I think Ellyn touched on this earlier, and it is way too many weeds to get into at this point in time, but there is a SAPO permit, and then there are certain things that your event might trigger another permitting process to be conscious of. So stages over a certain height or square footage require a DOB permit. Elements over 10 feet in height require a DOB permit. If you have food involved, which I'm going to discourage currently, that triggers a health permit. If other things, there's just a whole laundry list, and we touched on that earlier. We can also help you walk through that and figure out what the best way is, but it's also consideration on your end. So I think the big takeaway for using our public spaces and working in them, particularly with the guidelines that we have right now, is scale of your performance or event, and flexibility, being willing to kind of break it up, figure it out, work around things, or maybe reimagine things in ways you might not have done pre-COVID. And again, I do feel the need to kind of reiterate again, we are subject to the same guidelines that SAPO put forth earlier, 50 people max at any given time, all those other things. So, but the public space unit, and I know that Wendy's team as well, are on standby to really work with you and work thinking through these things and coordinate with SAPO as well for permitting. That quickly said.
Sorry, we're a little, I don't want to cut you off, but we're a little bit behind with time.
Sure, let me just, 12 seconds and I can get through this last slide. SAPO does permit our events. There's different levels and insurance requirements. Everything that you need to know is on SAPO's website there in the link. Plaza partner organizations are very key to successful events in plazas. We would love to work with you to connect you with our plaza partners to make sure everything's coordinated well. And in locations where there isn't a plaza partner, then you're working with people on my team as well as people on Wendy's team to pull off and execute your events. Thanks very much. If you would like more information on plazas and other locations under our purview, please feel reach out to plazas@dot.nyc.gov, join our newsletter, and as you saw Wendy's contact information before. Quickly want to introduce, if it's okay with you, Gonzalo, Leslie Devil from Street Lab to quickly go through her segment on producing in public spaces.
Great. I'll try to be really fast. I know I'm the last here. So hi, everybody. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Street Lab. It's an organization that creates and shares programs that have been specifically designed for public spaces in New York City, across the city. We've been around since 2011, and we've worked in all kinds of public spaces, parks, and all these DOT spaces you've just heard about. We have a lot of experience. I hope that the brief insights I share will be helpful. So in a nutshell, what we do is that we use, Andrew, if you could just flip through the next 3 slides and then sit on the third. We use this custom design infrastructure and programming to create new places for community and culture in the city. We offer a range of programs that introduce people to creative work and then get them reading, drawing, writing. All of these programs are staffed. We involve artists and also other organizations. The key thing about us is our model is pop-up. Everything appears, but then disappears. Nothing is permanent. At this point, everywhere we go is by request. And we prioritize some of these underserved locations, the high need locations that Andrew was talking about also. Over the past 10 years, we've popped up more than 750 times in about more than 220 locations. 76% of that has been in underserved areas or low to moderate income areas that lack resources. We also help others pop up, and some of you may be on the call, but we've collaborated with the Drawing Center, the Central Park Zoo, all 3 libraries, and a pop-up museum created by the Soho Memory Project. So when COVID hit, of course, it was a big challenge for us, just like all of you. Instead of trying to take our work online, we decided to work very hard to be ready for that moment when we could get back out on the street. And so in fact, that's what we did. The day after phase 4 started, we got out there with a new program called Play NYC, which is a no-touch obstacle course. We've been taking that to some of the official play streets in the city, as well as NYCHA housing. The program includes signage about social distancing, mask giveaways, and a hand sanitizing area. We followed that with a street marking kit that we're deploying now that lets New Yorkers draw together. So there's just 3 things I want to share that I hope will be helpful from our experience. First, to state the obvious, doing programming in public space is quite different from doing it in a private space. There's a lot of things you can't control. First and foremost, the weather. Andrew, if you could just flip to the next slide. Oops, let's go one more. Anyway, that's gonna, actually, just go back. Okay, so that's okay, stay right there. So a lot of things you can't control, the weather, but also, you know, who sees your work and what it means to them in this different context. But the benefits can be great, and that's why I keep doing it. That's why I keep doing it. It's an opportunity to engage New Yorkers you might not otherwise get to know. It's also, frankly, a good thing to know how to do, because I think, unfortunately, we're going to be grappling with disruptions like this, like more pandemics and hurricanes, more and more in the future. So the second point I want to make is that because it's very different, you do need to dedicate some time and investment, not just for planning logistics and the permitting process and things like that, but also paying particular attention to your setup and staffing, which turn out to be a huge part of the experience for the public. So Andrew, no, skip, yeah, so that's fine. So our benches are just an example. They turned out, they seat 2 people. They've been really key to making our program successful and allowing people who come together to linger for a little while. You also might need to incorporate, Andrew, if you could just show the next slide, just the, yeah, things like this, just some eye candy, you know, to attract people over, this beautiful pop-up book. And then Andrew, back one slide. So this is obvious, you're a guest. That's the third point, the last point. Every location has a history, stakeholders, and stories unfolding. And that's what makes these spaces so compelling to work in. So build in time to discover those stories and partner. Andrew mentioned the groups that are managing the plazas. The Parks mentioned the conservancies. We've worked with over 200 groups, and they range from anywhere from a woman in the Bronx who does a play street on her own to these BIDs, the business improvement districts, and other community-based organizations. These groups are already working hard to improve neighborhoods. They're already using space in creative ways. A lot of times they've already got the permit part done. And so they'll just, you know, slip you in. They'll ask you some questions. They'll incorporate your performance. They can tell you things like, did you know that on Friday afternoons is when the seniors come out? So, so that's it. I do want to second Andrew's point about, you know, I want to make a pitch for working in some of the public spaces that might not immediately come to mind first, which are wonderful. And so I've spent a lot of time in those places. There's a lot to be discovered. That's it. I'm happy to share more. There's lots of details. I urge you to all get in touch with Street Lab with me, can share the contact information. That's part of how we achieve our mission. So thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Leslie. We're going to do we're a little behind on time, but there's some few questions that I would like for us to answer. If you think, you know, it pertains to you, just shout out. It is just to confirm, you know, open streets are out of the question by now. We are not permitting activities on open streets. Is that
at the moment? Sorry, Stefan. At the moment, we're not permitting activities on open streets, but as Stefan indicated earlier, we're looking to get to a place where we can start to do that soon.
Andrew, there's a question about if there are any grants or production funding attached to the work happening at plazas.
At the moment, no, there isn't money available. We have, as part of our Plaza Equity Program, means of support for our plaza partners, and that could come through with a small amount of funds that could help bring activations to their spaces. But right now, we don't have any money in the bank, so to speak.
Permits and fees that were paid and then for this year will roll over to next year, or folks will have to start the permitting process all over again?
I can speak for SAPO. For SAPO, you need to reach out to us. When we denied your permit for this year, if you didn't withdraw it yourself, we offered you the opportunity of rolling over your application fee by form of a fee waiver code or by returning your money. So we've been processing those for the past few months. If you have not gotten that yet, or you did not get denied yet, but are looking to do that, just reach out to whoever was working on your application. It will not automatically roll over. You need to either be denied or reach out to us directly.
Parks has a very similar process right now. Yeah, we are allowing rollover of applications to 2021. There's a transfer notice that's being sent out as for applications, and you just need to follow the prompts within the email you receive to opt in for your transfer.
Would you be able to get a permit to multiple performances happening on a same day in order to accommodate more than 50 people at a time?
Who is that to, Commissioner?
All of you.
I can say that this is for the 2021. The idea of the seasonal showcase series is that there would be a series of performances. That is, in fact, what we're encouraging. I do want to say make a distinction between the summer streets where we were able to fund because of the sponsorship. For the seasonal showcase series, the idea is that people would have to come with their own funding and do the same kind of insurance requirements that everybody's talked about. But again, that is in development right now. We're going to be working with other people on that.
And I just to add to that, I think the question was also regarding the 50-person limit at this time. So
Yeah.
we are treating it as a 50 people at any given time. If you come to us with a proposal for a series of small shows in a row that are only going to have 50 people at any given time, we can explore that as a possibility. But the rule right now is 50 people at any given time. But again, we need to see the proposal and what your plans are to mitigate the number of people that are going to show up.
And there's not a set timeline for us to when the 50 people limitation is going to be revisited, right?
Ellyn, you're on mute.
We don't have a timeline for that. I would encourage you to contact the governor's office with your requests around that.
Performance, outdoor performance in private gardens and stoops. That's as long as they're under 50 people, they don't need a permit, right?
Yeah, however, we are having, like I think I mentioned in one of my examples, there are some performances where people are performing on their stoops, but putting an audience in the street. So the permit that you would get from SAPO for that or would be for the audience in the street, and that would be limited to 50 people. I think the 50 people still applies to indoor gatherings, but we don't issue permits for that. So if you're looking to build an audience in the street that's viewing a performance taking place on a stoop or in a window, which are definitely great creative uses of creating a stage in a safe manner, we can help with permitting the actual activity, the audience on the street.
What about privately owned public spaces?
I think this question is for parks about POP spaces, which are their own or DOT or parks.
I think it's actually city planning, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
City planning runs the privately owned public spaces.
Yeah, city planning does apparently have a permitting process for POPs, but I've never encountered it, to be honest.
It's not us.
We all work very well together.
They're privately owned.
But we all do we have sort of dividing lines there.
I will say that I had a brief conversation at the beginning of the pandemic with the group that runs Paley Park, the first POP, and they expressed, and they said they'd talked to a number of other POPs, real ambivalence about sort of throwing open their doors and really welcoming people in a parks or public plazas sort of way. I think they've loosened up a little bit. I'm not speaking on their behalf. This is just what I heard. It would be my instinct, extrapolating from that earlier conversation, that I wouldn't start, if I were looking to program in a public space, I wouldn't start with the POP. I would start with a publicly owned public space.
I think, Ellyn, you mentioned this, but I think it's worth repeating. Block parties and street festivals, are those permitted and limited by 50% 50 people capacity?
So currently the executive order prohibits us from permitting any street festivals. Anything with vending is not happening right now. And again, this is just to balance the resources that are being used and expended and really prioritizing streets for open space as much as possible. It's not that those activities increase the spread of COVID. It's trying to prioritize how the spaces are used. So anything that is permitted, block parties, yes, would be kept to that 50 person, and that is incumbent on the applicant to monitor for that. So we're not sending out enforcement, counting your numbers, but in general, those are also the guidelines that we understand to be safest.
I think this is a question for parks and speaks about the under 25 people sort of gathering. They're talking about workshops under 25 people. Do those still need to be permitted or not?
Did you say worships?
Workshops,
Workshops.
Yeah.
So in terms of our spaces, a permit is required for any gathering of 20 people or more. That said, even if you are under 20 people, if you are looking for a space to call your own for a workshop or other activity, I would recommend getting a permit. You always run the risk of not getting a permit, even, you know, under that 20-person cap, showing up at a space that's otherwise permitted. So a permit is always the best way to ensure the space is going to be available for whatever activity you want to do. But to the letter of the law, to speak to what Parks' regulations are, a special event permit's only required if your gathering is going to be over 20 people or promotional commercial.
And then there's a question about New York Forward affirmations. What comes first? Is it permitting with each of you and then the state, or the other way around?
So the New York Forward guidelines apply to specific industries. If you can make the case that your activity falls under those guidelines and is therefore subject to like a percentage of capacity, go for it. Our permits will work with you. It's not a separate plan. If you think you're doing something in a public space, we'll walk you through all of that permitting. But if you fall under that, if you're a film production, if you are a botanical garden, definitely I would encourage everyone to just dig through that website, and you might find that you have other opportunities for doing your work through some of those guidelines.
I want to thank you all for spending some time with us and our culture organizations, answering these questions and making yourself available. I think, you know, the takeaway here is that while it can get complicated and has gotten more complicated because of COVID, there's willingness on each of agency to work with each of the culture organizations and figure out how we can make these events happen. Like I said, we're going to be sharing a recording of this presentation and the presentations themselves and the contact information of all the presenters on an email, follow-up email for, you know, the participants. And I hope this was helpful to all of you, and I look forward to seeing all of you out there enjoying our open public spaces. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.